you all for coming today. This is the third event in our Peace Week series of events. And today we have Gail Reed, who is a clinical psychologist and has her own business, Forgiveness Recovery Programs. Gail is here to talk to us about forgiveness and inner peace. Dr. Gail L. Reed's research on forgiveness has demonstrated that a forgiveness recovery program resulted in psychological benefits for women with a history of emotional abuse by a spouse or romantic partner. A second study revealed an association between forgiveness levels and psychological health for people divorced due to infidelity. Gail Reed received a PhD from the University of Wisconsin in educational psychology. During her work at the University of Wisconsin, Gail participated in moral development of forgiveness research program under the auspices of Dr. Robert Enright, who actually referred Gail to me to have as our speaker, so I thank him. Gail currently teaches the psychology of interpersonal forgiveness at the University of Wisconsin Extension and has an ongoing practice of forgiveness psychology workshops and individual forgiveness recovery consultation. Gail recently gave a conference presentation on forgiveness therapy for CAPS International. Dr. Reed will soon offer a new course, the integration of interpersonal forgiveness and worldview for New College Madison. I would like you all to join me in welcoming Gail Reed.
Delight to be here. I'm really impressed that you do this peace process every year. I'm really impressed with it. I'm going to go through what we usually do with people over weeks and months. So I'm going to go through our forgiveness process that we developed at the University of Wisconsin, step by step with you. I'm going to give you chances to ask questions of me, but at the end you can ask more questions. First of all, I want to say that the forgiveness process that we have developed is now in a book, it's been in the book for a while, called Forgiveness is a Choice by Dr. Robert Enright. All of his research associates and he wrote this together. So you can get this and go through this process yourself, okay? So one of the focuses here is that if you have inner peace, you can contribute to family peace and community peace. And if you don't, you won't. So I'm going to introduce some things, the conceptual foundations, the benefits of forgiveness therapy, but then we're going to go through, as I said, this in-depth walking through the steps of forgiving. What is forgiveness? Uncovering the effects of the injury, working on forgiving, outcomes, and deepening. I'm going to show you that not only that book that I just held up, when I did my work with my participants, I wrote a workbook for them, especially for the condition of psychological abuse, okay? And I still use this in my practice. So that's what we do. I'm going to talk through Bob and myself. Enright Forgiveness Research Programs, we've been going for about 22 years now, I guess, or more. At the University of Wisconsin and also the International Forgiveness Institute. At the Institute, we educate clinicians. We have school children curriculum from all over the world, Belfast, Israel, Palestine, Greece, all these kind of places, including here, Milwaukee and so on. And we have other forgiveness resources on that website. You've already heard about my research, and I'm on the Speakers Bureau for the International Forgiveness Institute. That's why I'm here. But my main reason for being here is I'm a human being. People have done rotten things to me, and I've done rotten things to other people. I need to forgive. I need to be forgiven. We're all human beings. That's why we need to look at this so deeply. The contributions, I think, of our group are the psychology of forgiveness, the definition of forgiveness, the steps of forgiving, a measure of forgiving, which we're not going to look at today, research on the benefits of forgiveness therapy, and the curriculum we have for school children. I'm going to mention some of the research we've done, but we've done much more than I'm going to talk about. We see all kinds of good things, which I'll mention in a minute. This is a cognitive therapy. We talk about what you do when you've been hurt, what it feels like, what decisions you can make about that. We talk about how do I forgive, uncovering decision, work, and deepening. But it's not just cognitive. We think empathy and moral feelings follow. And we see that all the time. In fact, you're going to see me repeat this over and over again. This is actually the basis of our forgiveness therapy. Everyone has absolute equal human inherent worth. Everyone. Everyone is precious. Whether somebody's done something to you or you've done something to somebody else. That does not change your human preciousness. Okay? Forgiveness is based on that. So an inherent worth plus wrongdoing, still inherent worth. Inherent worth plus harm done, still inherent worth. We need to look at each other as precious human beings no matter what. This is the foundation of peace, isn't it? Of getting along with one another. And forgiveness is part of that. We're developmental psychologists, so we say we're teaching people to forgive. We have a good definition, good process. People choose to work on that, they adapt, they feel better, we get all these psychological health outcomes. And I'll tell you about those in a minute. But when we forgive over time, we're developing as human beings. So you choose and work over time. You change as a person. You decide who you identify with. People who forgive, who value forgiveness, who value virtue. You become a human being with a virtue identity, I would say. You work on finding meaning in suffering. What do I do when something bad happens to me? Do I get revenge or do I turn to the good? Do I do something good for the person? Do I choose virtue? Okay? So we see people developing over time. And this identity development, finding meaning in suffering, this is what drives the good psychological outcomes. This is the great news over here, the development, identity development about virtue. This is the good news, the psychological health outcomes. So the great news drives the good news. I always ask people when they come to see me, forgiveness is close to worldview and religion, isn't it? I always ask them, I have them fill out a form in fact, what's your worldview? And they don't have to show it to me if they don't want to. But I say that's a resource they're going to need to bring to the table, or they can bring to the table. So worldviews ask things like, who am I? Why do bad things happen? What do I believe? Who do I believe in? Who do I want to become? How does my worldview help me, especially in facing unfair suffering? What does my worldview say about unfair suffering and what I should do about that? But it's really an important resource that people bring. Some of my research shows how important that is. Here's our outcomes really quickly. And I'm going to go through my study very quickly also, and then we're going to go to the process. This is some of our research. We've done much more research than this. But incest survivors, people who had spousal psychological abuse, and they also were incested, women and children after divorce, adolescent bully victims, school children internationally, we have research on them, drug and alcohol addicted folk, end-of-life folk, prison inmates, to name a few, a very few. What happens if you don't forgive someone, do you think? Look at this list and see if you can add something to it. Unresolved anger, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress symptoms, low self-esteem and diminished self-worth, diminished relationships, poor decision-making, increased susceptibility to substance use or abuse, lack of meaning and purpose. We see this happen all the time when people come to see us at first. What happens if a person doesn't get that resolved for themselves, do you think? What happens to their family and their community? It doesn't just affect them, does it? It affects everyone around them. Often children are the recipients of this. They're the most vulnerable. I want you to fast on something. People do it when they have these unforgiven hurts. They do something, and I listed some betrayals. They're big betrayals. Incest, abuse, infidelity, neglect, bullying, but even gossiping or someone firing you unfairly. People will go to keep someone else, the wrongdoer, on the hook. They'll do something called accusatory suffering, which means they retell the story, not just to work it through and understand what they need to do to forgive, but to keep the wrongdoer on the hook. He or she is a bad person. I'm resentfully retelling this. It seems to take some of the weight off of me, but it's actually making me worse. I identify as a victim and with other victims this increases psychological distress and ongoing post-traumatic stress. It doesn't really relieve you. You'll see abused women doing this, for example, because they find people telling the story, and they stay there though, they stay stuck. It's good to tell the story, to figure out what to do, get out, get safe, whatever. But if you stay stuck in that old story, you're stuck. The wrongdoer is still hurting you, whether he or she realizes it or not. So that's going to be the opposite of finding meaning in suffering. Our forgiveness therapy shows dramatic decreases, statistically speaking, in anxiety, depression, PTSD, anger, aggression, drug and alcohol vulnerability, big effect sizes. You don't know what that means probably, but I want to brag about it. They're big effect sizes. Increases in hope, self-esteem, well-being, social skills, finding meaning in suffering, sense of inherent worth, and sense of purpose. We see big dramatic things happen in research, and I do in my clinical setting, which is even nicer because you're just with somebody alone and seeing them change like that. It also changes relationships. I'm having trouble with this, it's going too fast. Okay, here we go. I'm going to use a research example, the women I worked with after incest and spousal abuse. And I tell you, when I was going,
Do you want to use the mouse instead?
I'm going to try not to click it so hard, that's what's happening. I was singing up and down the road when I did these sessions with these women, because I could see them gradually getting better. But they were in very bad shape when I first met them. Debilitating resentment, some of them 15 to 20 years after they're out of the abusive marriage. Anxiety, severe clinical anxiety, clinical depression. Out of 11 symptoms of PTSD, 11, or I think there are 13 of them, 11 to 13. Low self-esteem and self-worth, learned helplessness. I can't get out of here, I can't make good decisions.
I think you might add on there suicidal and homicidal ideation.
That does happen, and actually in abuse, the person who's abusing the woman actually feels depressed and suicidal or homicidal, him or herself, and then they pass it on to the other person. Right? So there's that, and that's how you get those suicide murder things going on. See if I can just click this very briefly. Very good. And of course, they're big into the accusatory suffering. Repetitive retelling, underlying fear that it was their fault, the abusers told her it was. Actually, subtly, when kids are incested, they're told, just by the actions of the perpetrator, that it's their fault. Underlying big unresolved pain, they identify as a victim and with other victims. And when spousal abuse women go to get justice and they haven't forgiven, what are they doing? They're not really getting justice, they're getting revenge. And so it's not restorative justice that they want, it's revenge justice. It's much better after they forgive. Do that again. Maybe I do need the mouse. I did that, okay. Here's the outcomes, though, after these people went through the process. And I spent anywhere from 7 months to a year and a half with these ladies, depending on, that's called criterion outcome. We let them go until they think they're done. But depression, anxiety, self-esteem, PTSD, decision-making, both practical and moral decision-making, finding meaning in suffering, decrease in victim status, removal of that resentful retelling, and their primary identity as a victim of abuse, that all just changed dramatically. Women went from stories about how bad it was, how the man had hurt them, how it never stopped, how afraid they were, how anxious they were, to this happened, but I learned something from it, and now I am helping other people. Really wonderful stuff. So the big thing was finding meaning in suffering. I actually have a measure for that. Difficulty is an opportunity for growth. If something bad happens, can you go back and undo it? You can't. You can't change what happened, but you can respond to it yourself by changing yourself. You can identify with a forgiveness hero of some kind, explore your worldview, you reclaim your inherent worth, but you decide to have courage, compassion, moral love, all these big virtues that make you different. You get to decide who you're going to be, not the wrongdoer, not the injury. You get to decide. That's the big thing. We're going to go through the process now, but anybody have any questions or comments about that before we go forward?
Do you have some examples of a hero for us, a forgiveness hero?
Well, many people look up to Martin Luther King, for example.
Sure.
Yeah, right? Many people have forgiveness heroes within their worldview and their faith community, right? Think of Jesus, for example, or the Buddha. Many people have clients who follow the Buddha. So that's a forgiveness hero. But you also need people around you, I think, that are forgiving, so you can have them support you in it. So what is your worldview? You have a community that helps you think that forgiveness is important and will help you do it. I had that after a divorce myself. I had a whole group of women around me in my church setting that were just faithful to be helping me forgive. And so that's one of the reasons I could go to school and work on this, right? So I had a community around me. Anybody else? Any questions? Go ahead.
I don't know, how do you know if you've really forgiven somebody or forgiven a situation?
Well, that's a good question. How do you know if you've really forgiven someone? I don't think you do it all at once. I don't think it gets done and you know you're done. But you progress along the way, and when things appear to you, memories from the past, if you could do them more quickly and more painlessly and more lovingly, then you know you're on the path. It's a lifelong process, I think.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Go forward. What is forgiveness? Why do you think it's important to talk about this?
You already told us. All these negative things that happen because of unforgiveness.
That's true. What else though? Why do we need to know the definition of forgiveness? What might we do otherwise? Pass it on, or we might have misinformation about forgiveness. If I approach someone that had just been abused and said, I think you need to forgive, they might remember their mother telling them they needed to say they're sorry even if they weren't at fault, and off they go, just to make the situation okay. They might feel traumatized by that, right? They might do the wrong thing. So we always start off with this, is what is forgiveness. Again, misunderstanding, confusion with other concepts, family, peer, or group pressure. If someone else pressures you, you're not really forgiving. It needs to be a choice. Something happens in there when you choose forgiveness, okay? Otherwise, you get quick forgiveness, which is not thorough. You get traumatic bonding. I'm going to forgive the person and stay close to them and let them hurt me again. That's not forgiveness. That's traumatic bonding. Or you get unforgiveness. I just decide to forget about it. So we're going to go through. Forgiveness, we say first, is moral. It's not about a mistake or a cultural misunderstanding. It's about something that happened that hurts my inherent worth. It's against my inherent worth. Is unjust and hurtful, okay? But also, it's about the response. The response is moral. It's not just I forget it. I actually want to offer the other person good things. It's goodwill. This first is merciful restraint. I'm not going to do revenge, as much as you want to maybe do that. So it's merciful restraint, but it's also gifts. You may not be able to give the gifts. The person might be dead, they might be still dangerous, but you have the gifts in your hand ready to give them when they want them. Or you can do it with safety parameters, like sending a card, not having them over for dinner, things like that. Okay?
Is prayer a gift?
Yes,
You
it is.
pray for that person?
Right. In fact, the goodwill we want to offer, the moral love, is actually not family love, it's not friendship love, it's not partner love, it's moral love. It means I wish you well in human flourishing. So if you're going to want someone to flourish as a human being, you want them to be healed or stop the bad behavior, whatever it is, it's your responsibility to do that, but you can wish that for them, whether it's in prayer or some other way. It's paradoxical. When you forgive, guess who gets well? Not just the other person, you. It's beyond duty. No one can tell you have to do it. If it's not freely chosen, it's not forgiveness. And it's also a process. As you asked that question, it goes over time. You'll have anniversary events that remind you of something, and maybe the burden gets just a little bit lighter because you forgave them again for that memory that you had. Foundations, again, I'm going to keep hitting this up. Inherent human worth, preciousness, respect, appropriate limits for yourself and the other person, and this moral love, wishing them human flourishing, no matter what they've done. I did it again. I apologize for that, okay? I love that concept. I like to teach it in my adolescent development classes and stuff. It's so important. Forgiveness is not forgetting or denial. Can you think of something else that might not be? Anybody?
It's not letting the person hurt you again.
Right, it's not
That's what I was gonna say.
not inappropriate boundaries, right? It's not inappropriate boundaries. So if you forgot about or denied it, you might let the person get too close. And is that good for, it's not good for you if they hurt you again, right? But is it good for them if you give them that chance? No, it's not good for them. So you don't want to do that. It's not condoning. Oh, it wasn't that bad, it was only verbal abuse, it wasn't physical abuse, it only happened once. It's not doing that. To really validate the process of forgiveness, you need to name the wrong and know it was wrong. That's best for you, and it's also best for the wrongdoer. It's not excusing. It's not saying, well, his father beat him up, and so he can't help but beat me up. Now, it might be very difficult for this person not to get in a rage and beat someone up because of what's happened to him or her as a child, right? But he can help it, maybe with lots of therapy. But we don't want to take away the dignity of that person's human choosing. We don't want to take that away. We also don't want to deny how bad it was for ourselves either. So we don't want to excuse. We want to name the wrong and know it was wrong. It's not condemning. Not saying I'm a good forgiving person, you're the bad person. It's not condemning. It's also not seeking justice or compensation. Now you might seek that later. For example, a woman might seek a good placement schedule for her kids or something like that. But you don't wait to forgive until you get compensation or justice. Otherwise, how long might you be waiting? Forever, maybe, right? Right. Something like that, right. But it's also not seeking justice to get revenge. No. And it's also not saying that it was okay, even if you get. I'm going to give you an example. Because a betrayal, justice does not affect the betrayal, actually. It cannot do it. I'm going to give you a really stupid example. We drove up here, or drove down here, my friend Pat and I, in my sort of dirty Toyota Matrix. And usually it's dirty, it has no gas in it. And let's say, for example, I gave a code in my garage to some of the neighborhood boys in my neighborhood to mow my lawn. And one day they came in and took my car for a joyride. And they felt sorry about it, and so they not only waxed and washed it and filled it up with gas, they detailed it. And then they gave me a note saying that they would mow my lawn free for a week, or several weeks, And they apologized. But they still broke trust, okay? That betrayal does not, that's nice, I'm glad they did that, that's good. But the betrayal cannot be touched by anything but forgiveness, I'm telling you. You cannot solve it with anything but forgiveness. It's not simply saying, I forgive you. In fact, it may not be safe to say that to someone. They might say, well, I didn't do anything bad. What are you saying that to me for? They may not be ready to hear it. It's not a grim obligation. Oh, I better forgive, otherwise I'm not going to be a good person or something like that. In fact, I would suggest to you, from my experience with my clients and my own experience, forgiveness brings joy. It brings joy and peace. So it's not forgetting, denial, condoning, excusing, condemning, seeking justice, simply saying I forgive you, a grim obligation. It's also not reconciliation. True forgiveness wants reconciliation, but it's not reconciliation itself. Reconciliation is a whole other step. It requires not the forgiver only, but the wrongdoer. And you need to be patient with that wrongdoer. They may not want to do that. Forgiveness
They
is
may
one.
never want to do
They
it.
may never want to do it. Forgiveness is one person's moral response. Reconciliation is the moral response of both the injured and the injurer. Forgiveness wants reconciliation, but barriers are the wrongdoer is still dangerous. The wrongdoer doesn't believe he or she did something wrong. The wrongdoer is inaccessible. Maybe they have Alzheimer's or something, actually. They're dead. But the most important point, the wrongdoer needs time to work on receiving forgiveness. He or she needs to be ready for that. We have a whole companion process for that. I actually met a man once in a Lutheran group. They were having a retreat that I was going to, and they prepared for the retreat with several meetings ahead of time. They were working on forgiving fathers, actually. And this one man in there was still furious at someone who had gone driving drunk and killed his son-in-law. And the wrongdoer was ready to receive the forgiveness, but this man wasn't ready to forgive. So it might be the other way, timing's not there. So we each need to do our own process and come together when it's possible. We might have partial reconciliations too. For example, someone gambled away a bunch of money in our shared company credit card. I might be their friend again, but I might not do a business with that person again, at least till they've been to Gamblers Anonymous for a while or something. You need to work things out like that.
I had an aunt that was killed, and I was very close to her.
Uh-huh.
Am I supposed to forgive the person that did it? I mean, how do I handle that?
Is this person still alive?
Yes,
And he murdered her?
yes.
Well, what do you think it will happen if you don't?
I have some anger towards him. He's in prison for his life. It surfaces every once in a while.
Yeah.
I have a scrapbook in which I have information about her. I think with time, that's softened my anger, but I can still get quite angry at times. She was a school teacher, and she was a great person.
I'm going to tell you a story, man.
Yeah.
If you've ever watched the Discovery Channel, there's a woman whose name is Marietta Yeager Lane. Do you know, have you heard of her, Marietta Yeager Lane? Her daughter, Susie, was killed when she was 8 years old. You have a cow or something in the background there. Her daughter was killed. It was one of those Jeffrey Dahmer type killings, where he stole her out of a tent when they were camping. This was back in the 70s. And he did a Jeffrey Dahmer type thing with her. But this was a long time ago. Marietta was Catholic. They'd come from Ohio for this vacation, and then they were by the Three Forks of the Missouri. Ironically, Sacagawea was kidnapped from there also. But this man was a schizoaffective, and so he could function somewhat. So he had killed some other people before they didn't catch him. But then Marietta's daughter, Susie, was kidnapped by him, abused, and killed. So this is before cell phones. So the FBI had to have her on the phone with him all the time for over a year so they could trace his calls and catch him, okay? And she got to the point where she could kill him with her bare hands. And then she realized, because he was taunting her as part of his illness, and she realized what was happening to her. And so she said to God, I don't want to forgive, but I need your help to forgive because I actually do want to forgive. And so she worked on forgiving him. And as she was still on the phone with him all these times, she could hear how ill he was, how broken he was, how despairing he was, how dysfunctional he was. And she started caring about him for his own welfare. Eventually, after a year, they caught him. And she worked toward him not getting the death penalty. And she's still active in that. She runs groups for families of murder victims to choose forgiveness instead of the death penalty. And if you're with that woman in a room, I've been with her, she is full of power, full of joy and full of power. And she still misses Susie, though, of course. But this is how she's telling Susie's story. She adds on her forgiveness of this man who did that to her.
We also have, at the present time, as you know, a political candidate who is making some pretty hateful, strong statements about Mexicans, Hispanics. My daughter-in-law is Hispanic, and I have 2 Hispanic grandchildren. He's also made some very hateful statements towards women, by the way.
and also African Americans, which I have a mixed granddaughter.
Right. So how do we handle forgiveness with him?
We say, we're not going to mention his name because we're not going to go down that road. We say he is not encouraging inherent worth, but we are going to claim his inherent worth no matter what. That's what we're going to do in response.
What was that?
We're going to say that we don't believe he's disparaging other people's inherent worth, right?
Yes.
Right.
And so we're going to say that that's not true, but we're not going to disparage his inherent worth. We're going to claim his inherent worth no matter what he does.
That's
gonna
gonna
say
be-
he's valuable
That's
no
gonna be a
matter what
little
he is.
difficult, but I'll practice it.
It takes practice. You can't do it all the time, right?
You gotta pray for his healing, because obviously something needs to be.
Especially if he wins.
Oh,
Let's go through how do I forgive. This is going to be, we have about a half an hour to do this. But this is something we do again over weeks and months. So I want you to realize as you're listening to this, things are going to come up for you. You need to maybe access your own faith community or friendship circles to get some help with this. You also can buy, again, Forgiveness is a Choice if you want, and go take it to a therapist. You can do that. That's why we have that book. So we go through the forgiveness process. We start with the uncovering. And one of the things we do right away is we look at psychological defenses. People are usually defending themselves by doing some things. Denial, that's saying it didn't happen, displacement, hurting our children, putting it off on somebody else. The old saying, if you have a bad day at work, you come home and yell at your wife and she kicks the dog, that kind of displacement. Repression, just shoving it inside yourself, what does that do? Depression, anxiety. Suppression, I always call that, what is this ho-ho doing in my hand? Drinking, eating too much, working too much, all those kind of things. Dissociation, not even remembering that it happened to you, not being able to access the feelings. And the other thing that's really important to me, you identify with the wrongdoer. That is, if that person said I was worthless by treating me this way, I must be worthless. And that's wrong. We want you to re-identify with your worth. Because eventually you're going to grant the wrongdoer inherent worth. We want you to get yours back, realize that, so you can give it to the other person. Anger, we talk about anger. Anger is a good town crier. It tells you when something's wrong. It tells you when there's unresolved pain, right? You need anger. It motivates for change. I can do this. I can ask for safety. I could move someplace else. I could get a different job, whatever it is. But if it moves into stay, it's not a good house guest, a long-term house guest. It turns to destructive anger, blame, resentment. There's an old saying that having resentment is like drinking poison and thinking it's going to hurt the other person. The Chinese have a saying that if you're going to go out for revenge, you better dig 2 graves. Right? And that is what's happening all over our world, isn't it? We're doing those kind of things. So it's not, anger's good, but you want it to use it for problem solving, not to have it be part of your life. Shame is the other thing that happens, especially when people have been hurt as children, especially by meaningful people, family members, clergy, school teachers, neighborhoods, folk. They really feel shame. Shame is not the same as I did something wrong, so I feel ashamed. We don't use it that way as a psychologist. It's a feeling of being worthless, embarrassed. If anyone really saw me, they knew I was defective, I'm damaged goods, that kind of thing. So we talk about what is guilt. You broke your own ethical standards, and yes, you want to have guilt because you want to change that, right? Your worldview standards, your own ethical standards, your community standards, you broke those. Yes, you want guilt because you want to grow up and do better. But shame is an outcome of an injury. Someone's been telling you you're worthless by incesting you, by mocking your sibling. If people are watching abuse, they're being abused. So we talk about that. I had a woman once who was so shamed by her mother and then her husband that if she was standing at a gas pump, like 3 or 4 down from the next gas pump, and some men up there were laughing, she would assume it was about her clothes. She just was so sure she was a worthless piece of garbage. And so we worked through that. She didn't believe that at the end. But I encourage people to say, what do others besides the wrongdoer say that I am? And you have a worldview. a community too that possibly can do that, or your family, or your work cohorts, some other people that know you're good, and they're giving you other information besides the shame information. But the really thing that's going to change this is, I decide I am worthwhile, and I decide the wrongdoer is worthwhile, and I forgive that person. That's what really changes this. So these are just warm-up exercises here, okay? Replaying the events. This is called cognitive rehearsal, rumination. It's part of post-traumatic stress syndrome. But you need to tell the story to someone who believes it, who has empathy for you, has problem-solving skills for you. You need to tell the story. But when it gets to be repetitive, intrusive, resentful, it's with you all the time. Some of the women I worked with, it happened 2 or 3 times a day. Repeating, or at least a couple times a week. They're living in the injury that happened sometimes years ago. This is post-traumatic stress. And so I invite people to think that you can't, the reason why this is happening, your mind doesn't want this bad thing to have happened, or the pattern of bad things to have happened. It doesn't want that. So it's trying to fix it by repeating the story, hoping there's going to be a different ending, okay? And there's not. You can't change what happened. But I invite them to consider, before we go forward, that you could decide to be a forgiver, and that's going to be your control over the end of the story. You can choose to be a forgiver, and that's going to be your ending of the story, your new ending. And when you're doing this, the wrongdoer is probably off somewhere, and they don't even know you're thinking about them anymore, right? So you have to take control of this, but you can do it by forgiving. Slowly. These are big projects for people who have been hurt very badly. But over time, you can change this. We talked then about energy loss. Think about all the things we just talked about. There's a lot of energy going into anger, the old story, the shame, the psychological defenses, the pain that's underneath all of that, right? There's a lot of energy loss there. And people have to come up to face a permanent loss. They might have got injured, their legs now not working well, or they've lost financial support, they have an estrangement from a family member, something's happened that's probably permanent. How do I face that? And you have to say to yourself, the world is unfair. In some ways it's unsafe and it's unfair. We live in a place, at least I've had a wonderful life mostly. And it's been just a joyous, wonderful life. But the world is still unfair. People do unfair things. And you have to say, what is my worldview? What do I say about unfair suffering? We have to be able to face that, or we can't grow up as human beings, right? This is how we change for the better. Erik Erikson says in his developmental process, which I just love and I still teach, that in adolescence or early adulthood, we should pick a worldview with virtues in it. Because we're going to face difficulty in our life, and we need to rely on those virtues to face it. Otherwise, we're going to end up in despair at old age. And we don't want to be there, right? And working for peace is part of that. And getting parts of peace, like forgiveness, is part of that. Aspects of peace. So we bring it to the point that we say, well, the current responses aren't working, right? They're not working. And so probably there is some resentment and revenge there. People at first want to tell me I don't have that problem, but they all do because they haven't solved the pain yet. And so we say, well, one woman told me, is it okay in a talk that I don't really have resentment and revenge toward my wrongdoer, this man that left her at the altar 30 years before, but I saw him a few weeks ago, and his marriage failed, and he was a drunk, and he was on the streets, and is it okay that I'm kind of happy about that? Like, no, it's not. You know it wasn't okay, that's why you're asking. But you can have subtle revenge, is what I'm saying, subtle resentment. So she knew it was wrong. Then we go to the decision phase, and this is what most people think forgiveness is. You just decide to forgive, and that's all you do, right? So, but we say it's really like a conversion process. You're changing your heart to be a person that pursues virtues, courage, mercy, moral love, compassion, and you're willing to commit to a process that's hard work. You want to choose what kind of person you're going to become. You are asking how your worldview and your family members and community members can help you. There is a man in prison who is telling us that he even in prison, he hurt somebody because someone hurt him. This is at CCI, Columbia Correctional Institute. And he realized that if he still was mad at that person, not only did he hurt someone else, but he was still miserable himself. Now the community is protected from him. He's in jail, in prison for life, I believe. But he actually realized he's just still suffering from this. He's keeping him on the hook, like I talked about the accusatory suffering, when you keep the other person on the hook and tell bad stories about them. You realize, but then I'm on the hook. I'm still on the hook. And so he gave that up. But that was a big step. I'm not at least going to have resentment or revengeful thoughts toward this person. That's the beginning. That's merciful restraint. Skip that one. The other important thing, then we go to the work phase, and this is where the stuff that really rubber hits the road here. Somebody's hurt you really badly. Why do you think you're angry and depressed and all those things? Pain, 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 pain. People are in pain, and the pain is real. And you need some way of grieving it. This is different than a regular grief process, though, because you're trying to grieve it so you don't hand it back to somebody else. It wasn't just something sad that happened, like someone that died, which is bad enough. But the act itself was bad. The unfairness itself was bad. The losses are bad. It's all bad, right? It's all very painful. So you grieve in order to not to pass on the pain to the wrongdoer, other people. Again, kids are the ones that usually get this stuff, often. And we do an exercise with people, and if you are afraid of the water, you can do something else. But the idea is that grief, I think we're afraid of grief when it comes up. I don't like grief myself. I don't like pain. And when it comes up, you think, oh my gosh, I'm going to get drowned by this wave of grief. And so I just push it away. And we encourage people to say, the grief is going to come up like a wave, but it's going to go down. It's not going to last forever. You're not expected to grieve everything the first time it comes up. It's going to be one thing or two things. You're going to learn something from it. If you stand in the wave instead of running away from it, you plant your feet. You take a hand on each side, maybe a friend, a counselor or somebody. You stand in the wave and you learn from the pain. You grieve maybe one memory at a time. You understand something. You get rid of some of the burden. You learn something from it. You maybe refrain from hurting somebody else because of it. You get things. The pain teaches you things. You need to stand in it. You get stronger.
So the wave is the multiple waves then? So it comes again,
It comes again and again.
and
Right.
again.
Right. When I was grieving my mother's death back in the 2000s, so weird to say that now, but anyway, I thought it was 2 years out. I thought I was done grieving her, for a while at least. And I went into the store and I saw a package of pecan sandies, which I actually think are hideous, but she loved them. And I just burst into tears. And I could have, because I was working on this, I didn't do this, but I could have just shoved it in and finished my grocery shopping. I didn't. I put my cart aside, I went outside and sat in the car. I thought, I need to cry, I need to sit with this. And I'll get something from it. And get some relief, get some memories, whatever it is. So it's really important to do that. I don't think people like to do it. I think especially Americans don't like to do this. But then you become stronger. And it's not like it's going to be over the first time. We forgive over time. But you can become stronger in breaking patterns and not passing it back to others in the wrongdoer. See if I can do this. So then the other big important thing is we reframe the wrongdoer. We don't excuse or condone him or her. They still did the thing. They're still culpable for it. Okay? They're still culpable. But they're vulnerable human beings like us. They want to be loved. They want belonging. They want safety. They want all those kind of things that we want. They're human like us. So they're vulnerable but culpable. They're fallible but culpable. The other thing is, we look at, no matter what this person did, what's the right answer? They have absolute inherent human worth, human preciousness. What they did does not change that. It does not change that. I've seen people, when they grant this back to the wrongdoer, all of a sudden they go, I have that too. They recognize that as they grant that to the wrongdoer, they're granting it back to themselves. It all comes from someplace else, but they recognize it, right? Right, so, and we see that wrongdoer is not the wrongdoing. He or she is someone that did a wrongdoing, but he is not the wrongdoing. He is more than that. He's a precious human being that's made a big mistake, but he has other things about him or her besides that wrongdoing, especially that inherent worth piece. Okay? I've seen people that are so shamed by having sexual abuse in the home as kids and then having emotional abuse in the home with a husband, so shamed that they could not get this piece till we got here. One woman finally said to me, not only do I feel I have inherent worth, so I can break up with a man who's wanting me to date him even though he's married, I can recognize the inherent worth of his wife and apologize to her and break back out of the situation. Her shame was driving her. Anybody to pay attention to her was important, right? If I told her not to do that, stop it, stop it, stop it, she probably couldn't have done that. But in this reclaiming of her inherent worth, she could do that for another person. Marvelous story. I love that when that happened. Watch her process that back here. The other thing is you begin, as you reframe the person cognitively, they're not the wrongdoing, they have other things about them. You can experience empathy and compassion for them. Imagine his or her feelings, the need for belongingness, all those things, and have a passion for his or her welfare within safety limits and appropriate expression. So in other words, you want human flourishing for this individual, but you don't need to be the person who is going to do that for them. For example, I had one of my clients whose husband was bipolar, and he'd go off his meds, and she could see it in the placement switches. And she couldn't do anything about that. He'd do something to her probably again because he was abusive. But she could call his sister and say, so-and-so's off his meds, can you check in with him and see if you can get some help? So she could do something to help him without getting herself hurt. Okay? Then we offer goodwill, and we go back to merciful restraint. I decide I'm not going to be resentful or revengeful. And believe me, if you've had a big pain, the resentfulness is going to come back up again, over and over again. But you can recognize it for what it is. I need to go back and grieve the pain again. Something is going on here. I'm having another memory, something changed, it's an anniversary. I need to go back and grieve the pain so I'm free to withhold the resentment and revenge. Okay? I have a story of my own about that, but it's too long, I won't tell you, and it's kind of embarrassing. It was a good story, actually. But then the part two is generosity. And generosity isn't just I gave somebody a $5 tip instead of a $2 tip because they did a good job. Generosity is being a big soul that gives something that's completely undeserved. It's free giving, undeserved giving. And it's aiming toward this person's human flourishing. I'll give you two examples quickly of Susie Friedman's study. She did study with incest survivor, and one of them, her father was still dangerous. He wasn't admitting it. He wasn't recanting anything. And so she could just tell her little kids, they're 3 and 4, about the things he did that were good for her, swinging on the swings, and she could send him cards and stuff, okay? But she still did moral love for him. But she refrained from speaking badly about him, except for safety issues. Another woman, though, her father did recant. He was on his deathbed. He had a heart attack. He was dying. He had terrible headaches, and so they reconciled. She was wiping his forehead and singing his favorite song. I cry. Yes, he died. So things like that can happen. But you have to be careful. Both of them are doing the good, right? They're both doing the good. When we get to the end of the process here, we call this discovery or deepening phase. Finding meaning in suffering, finding release, and finding purpose. Purpose is different from meaning. Purpose is when you're helping someone else. Meaning is growing as a person. Of course, this is my favorite thing. This is Viktor Frankl. Who's read Viktor Frankl? This is I met his grand-nephew-in-law once at a talk, which is wonderful. But anyway, he was a concentration camp victim. And he dealt with people afterwards. And he calls it logotherapy. Man's Search for Meaning is one of his books. It's a wonderful book, life-changing book. But he says that when bad things happen and you choose virtue, You can change a tragedy into a triumph. Unjust suffering happened. I can't change that, but I can choose to be changed. I pursue virtue. I am victorious over that. And I'm telling you, the things I've had to forgive are the big things. As much as I wouldn't have wanted those things to have happened, they weren't good for my family, I would not give up the joy and the triumph I got out of forgiving that person for anything in the world. I would not give it up. Back here. I see if I can get to that one. There, oh. Well, I know it's there. Okay, we got it. Okay. So, who am I as I pursue virtue? More than the injury, more than the view of the injurer, more than a victim, a loved and loving person, a triumphant, transformed person. It brings release and it leads to purpose. And release is from the resentment, pain, anger, all the terrible things we've been talking about, but also living in the past, and then you're able to consider and have the energy to consider future possibilities. Back here. And then finding new purpose. I'm going to stop here and let you ask some questions afterwards. One way you can find new purpose is reconciliation. That doesn't always happen, but it can happen. In fact, it's good if it happens. I have a client, I'm just going to leave her initials up there, who she left a very abusive marriage, and her son was getting married about the same time as that divorce happened, and he decided to take his father's side because his father actually was quite mentally ill and he needed help, and so he got drawn into that. And he broke up and didn't speak to his mother for 2 or 3 years, and which is very difficult estrangement. There are babies maybe coming and so on. But then we went to a pastoral counselor for his son and for me. We went all 4 of us together and worked through what is abuse, why did this happen, we're not angry at this man, we just want the pattern to be broken, so on and so forth. They have a wonderful reconciliation. She's helping him raise his now 2 children. And at one point, the first grandchild's birthday, she allowed it to be in her community room in her apartment building and welcomed in her ex-husband and his new wife. And she just, it was beautiful. She could just do that and feel good about it. It was really good. Helping others, I already told you about the woman who reported her bipolar former husband's needs to her sister-in-law. But a lady I had who was so depressed, this is 15 to 20 years after the marriage was over, she was so depressed. She had been a lawyer, a brilliant lawyer, but he was so abusive, and she was so concerned about her children. She took a low-level clerical job in a government agency, and so she could protect her children and go home all the time. Otherwise, she was traveling. But 15 years later, she's still in this awful job, and she's still depressed. And after this program, she felt so much better. Her depression went down. All the signs were excellent. But I did a follow-up about 3 to 6 months later. She had gone back and refurbished her law degree. She had risen up in the agency and was now changing policy to help people. She was just doing so well. Okay. These are really wonderful stories. And this is a scratch on the surface of all our stories. But I really encourage you to consider forgiving as part of peace and peaceful coexistence with other individuals, especially in your families, but in communities everywhere. But I want to stop here and let you ask me some questions you can want to for the last 5 minutes or so.
We've talked a lot about forgiving others. Does this process really work for forgiving yourself?
That's a good question. We have a companion process for receiving forgiveness and one for forgiving yourself. And they follow the same steps, essentially. One difficulty, though, in forgiving yourself is that sometimes people will say, I can't forgive myself, and they actually didn't do something wrong. They just wished it hadn't happened. They didn't really break an ethical principle. But if
How about specifically when you're raised in fundamental religion and you're born in shame, you're raised in shame, and you are damned?
Yeah.
The worthlessness that this is supposed to overcome, I guess.
Yeah, I would suggest that doing the forgiveness process with the people that did that to you is really important.
Those people are long ago dead.
Well, you still can do it, right? People still do it with individuals who have died. And you don't deserve to feel that shame. You are not made to be shamed. Nobody was made to be shamed. You're precious. You're precious no matter what, and you need to reclaim that. So I don't think you need to forgive yourself possibly here. You need to forgive some other people who didn't teach you that the way they should have.
I've always been concerned about what parents do sometimes when a child has done something improper to another kid, is, just say you're sorry.
Yeah, right,
And the child grows up thinking that's the end of it.
right, right.
And for me, I was a teacher in high school, and my students would sometimes say after they misbehave, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I would say, "That's not enough.
Right,
What are you going to do to change your behavior?"
yeah,
And they would be very upset because I wouldn't accept their apology.
right.
And I think we have a tendency to still think, as we did as children, that if we say we're sorry, it's over.
It's over, right.
It isn't over.
There's two pieces to that. You want the wrongdoer to change their behavior, right? But have options to do it. For really little kids, it should be no, but yes. No, you can't do this, but yes. And helping them understand the other person's feelings and talking it through with them and so on. And for older kids, they need both. They need that also. No, but yes, and this is the ways you can change yourself for the better.
What they were doing was apologizing to me.
Right.
And I had tried to help them understand they should apologize to the other students in class because they had disrupted the class.
And
But
maybe-
they only saw it as what they had done to me.
And that's an easy way out, really, in some ways, or a safe way out. And so to have the whole class work as a place where you can say something about a wrong behavior and everyone kind of brainstorm about how to solve it would be a really good option there. One more?
Do you do work also with forgiveness and reconciliation on national levels?
Well, right now, Bob Enright is working with our continuing ed department to get a forgiveness and reconciliation, hold your breath now, a conference between Palestinians and Israelis next year. And the other thing that we do, we put our forgiveness curriculum in schools, such as in Belfast, or in Palestine and Israel. This is teaching inherent worth right the way up, and then working up toward the full forgiveness process as they get older. And this is bringing peace from the ground level up, I would suggest. Not easily, because people have a lot of strong feelings about what they're doing and how they need to act to protect themselves and so on. But we're working on that. What little daub of good we do, we're just happy about it. But there are whole schools in Belfast that have set themselves up as forgiveness schools.
In order for us to access this program, we need to buy your book, is that correct?
Well, actually what you can do is go on internationalforgiveness.com, www.internationalforgiveness.com, and all the resources are there. And if you just want to look at them, you can do that. www.internationalforgiveness.com. And a really nice man named Dennis Lang, the director, will be there to help you. He's a sweetheart.
Are there any other questions?
Any other questions? Well, thank you for your participation. I really